What's up, y'all? It's Hannah, and I'm finally sitting down today, and I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for a while, which is film makeup videos for my own Instagram, possibly YouTube channel. I don't know. Earlier last week, I had posted on Facebook and on Instagram if anyone had any questions involving makeup and like what they really wanted to thoroughly learn about, because I was scrolling through TikTok the other day and I came across this girl who was kind of going over like the basics of makeup, and the comments made me really sad because it was a bunch of girls who was like, I really like makeup and I really want to get into it, but it's just too much and I don't want to deal with it and it's way too much to learn and it's overwhelming and scary. And I totally understand that. I started doing makeup when I was 11, so like 9 years ago. Obviously I wasn't like shopping at Ulta or anything back then, but that's when I started and I started learning from YouTube. But I can say back then it was not nearly as complicated or overwhelming as it is today. Like, there is so much to take in. I can totally understand why someone would be scared. So I asked you guys what you wanted to learn about, and I'm going to do my best to explain from my own personal experience what works best, what doesn't work, how everything works. And before we get started, I want to say that I'm not a professional. I'm not claiming to be a professional. This is literally just my own personal experience and my knowledge that I want to share with other people. You don't have to take my advice. If you like what you're doing, that's you. That's the most important thing about makeup, is there is no rules to it really. Yet there are like common guidelines, I guess, about how most things are meant to be used and how they're used most efficiently, but by all means there is no rules, and if you like the way you do your makeup, then that's what matters. This isn't going to be like a tutorial of like how I do my makeup or anything. I plan on doing videos on that later. This is more so just like kind of explaining what things do, what they're meant for, how to use it, like what tools you need to use it, the different variations of makeup. Just, I wanted to go from the ground up and really explain from my knowledge how to do makeup like in general. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that I want to go over is how to prep like your base, which this is where like your skincare and primers and stuff take place. So what I use before I do foundation and everything, I clean my face with my face wash and micellar water and everything. And then I start with the First Aid Beauty Ultra Repair Cream. It's a moisturizer. I use that. I don't use primer. I personally think it's a waste of money for me. I've never seen a difference in my skin if I do use one or if I don't use one. It doesn't make me break out. If I don't use it, it doesn't really do anything for me. So I don't really spend money on primer, but if I do use primer, it's this e.l.f. tone adjusting one. It's the green one, or I use the Benefit Professional. But if you are going to use primer, it's good to know what it's meant for. Primer is meant to be like a layer in between your foundation and your actual pores on your skin. This prevents like breakouts and prevents just like oils from going directly into your pores. A lot of people use the metaphor of like how when you're painting a house, you paint the primer and then you put the paint on it. It's literally the exact same thing, but you use it on your face. There's a lot of different types of primers. Mine is hydrating and smoothing, the e.l.f. one. There's like smoothing ones that fill in your pores. That's the Benefit Professional. That one actually does work. I just don't see a difference with my skin. There's hydrating ones that kind of give your face a little bit of like a glow and just bring moisture back to your skin. That's probably better for dry skin people or a combination. There's also mattifying primers, which I would recommend more for people with oily skin because it really just soaks up any oils or anything, gives you a nice, smooth, dry, even base for your foundation. Primers also usually get rid of any bumps or like texture that you have on your face that foundation might accentuate if you put it on top of that without covering it or anything. The other thing that I use to like really prep my face and make sure that it has moisture in it and is ready to go is this Pearl Essence Rose Water. This is like $32 online, but I got this for $8 at TJ Maxx. Don't buy it online. But so after your face is set however you want to set it and is ready to go for foundation and whatnot, another step that I recommend that's completely optional if you need it, if you have any redness or acne or anything on your face that you want to eliminate, I highly recommend a green concealer. This is the LA Girl Pro Conceal. I really recommend this one, and it's really, really cheap. Green concealer can be kind of scary to people, but if you blend it out really good and then put your foundation over it and your concealer over it, it will completely get rid of any redness that you don't want. The reason that this happens is because green counteracts red on the color wheel. You can do that with like orange concealer, purple concealer, depending on your skin tone and the issues that you want to eliminate. I personally don't do a lot of color correcting anymore. The only thing that I've ever used is this green concealer, but if you guys want more information on color correcting, just let me know and I can get more information. Okay, moving on to foundation. So this part can be really, really confusing, especially nowadays because there's so many different types of foundation and so many different types of skin tones and formulas, and it's just really overwhelming, even for me. I really don't recommend trying to buy foundation online, but if you do, one thing that I can recommend is if you go to Ulta.com, they have like a foundation shade finder where you can punch in the name of any current foundation that you have that's in your shade, and they can find other brands of different shades that are kind of like the same as the one you already have, if that makes sense. It's totally doable to order your foundation online. I do it all the time, but before you do, I highly recommend figuring out these 3 things about yourself. 1, you should probably figure out if you have dry, oily, or combination skin. They're all pretty self-explanatory. If you have dry skin, you usually have dry flakes, or it just feels like it needs a little bit of moisture sometimes. Oily skin, you have a lot of oil that settles on top of the surface of your skin, mostly around here or in your T-zone or your chin. Combination is a little bit, it's like in the middle. I have combination skin. Sometimes I have oily skin, sometimes I have dry skin. And the reason you need to know these things is because different foundations have different purposes for different types of skin. Starting with hydrating foundation, which just brings a little bit of life to your face, and it's what I use. I use the MAC Studio Fluid foundation and the Milani Conceal 2-in-1 foundation, and they both kind of add a little bit of luminosity to my face without over drying it, and they're not super matte, which brings me to mattifying foundations, which I would recommend for oily skin. It kind of just makes all the oil settle and really dries it up. If I do use a matte foundation, I do use the L'Oreal Infallible Pro Matte. And then for people with combination skin like me, there are such things like satin finish foundations, such as the e.l.f. liquid foundation. It's kind of just a middle ground, since that's essentially what combination skin is. You have a little bit of both worlds. The second most important thing is knowing your undertones. There are warm undertones, cool undertones, and neutral undertones. So starting with warm undertones, a good way to know if you have warm undertones is if you take off all your makeup and look at your bare skin or your arms or your feet or anything. If you have a little bit of like a yellowish, warm hue to it, or if your veins appear more like green, olive, yellow. Another way to tell if you have warm undertones that Ulta actually lists on their website when trying to figure out undertones is whether or not gold jewelry looks better on you. Typically people with warm undertones, gold usually accentuates their skin. But as for cool undertones, a good way to know is if you look at your skin and you have some redness or pinky hues to your skin, and if you look at your veins and they appear more blue or purple or like pinkish. And the same thing with the Ulta website. If you prefer silver jewelry over gold, it usually accentuates cool skin better. And then neutral skin, which is me again. It's a little bit of both worlds. Once again, you have a little bit of redness or yellow tones, and it's kind of just a middle ground for both colors. You like both gold and silver, and you appear both red and yellow. One thing about foundations and stuff is there is a lot of trial and error involved and a lot of patience. You definitely probably won't find your perfect foundation right off the bat. Even if it's the right color and everything, you could end up hating the formula. It's really just best to keep trying different things and figure out what works best for you. And that brings us to the third and final point that I think is the most important when looking for foundations, is what you're looking to get out of your foundation. Are you looking for full coverage, like covering acne or bags or any imperfections? Are you looking for medium coverage, which is kind of, again, a middle ground? You don't want too much, you don't want too little. or if you want like a light coverage, which is just a little bit of color on the skin. It doesn't cover a lot of things, it just brings a little bit of life to your skin. I can show you guys some examples starting with light coverage. I have the Wet n Wild Photo Focus foundation. This is really cheap, you can find this at Family Dollar, and it is really good, but it is lighter coverage. It is buildable though, and this is more so what like the light coverage foundation looks like. It's really like translucent, and it just brings a little bit of color to your face. As for medium coverage, I have the e.l.f. liquid foundation, and that's a little bit thicker, but it's still kind of translucent, but it covers more than light coverage does. And for full coverage, I really recommend the Milani Conceal and Perfect foundation is what I'm wearing right now, and it really covers any sort of redness, blemishes, emotional baggage, anything you want to cover, and it's pretty thick. So if that's not your jam, I don't recommend it, but it is my jam, so it works really well. So one of the first questions I got was, what is the difference between blending with a brush and blending with a sponge? Personally, I prefer a sponge for blending foundation, concealer, creams, anything. I do use a brush for like finishing touches at the end after everything's kind of blended, just to make sure everything is smooth and blended together. From my own experience, it can be really hard to blend foundation with brushes, but if you do choose one, I recommend one like this Morphe one. It's just a really thick, like dense stippling brush. And blending your foundation with a brush takes a lot of practice versus like a sponge doesn't take as long to pick up on. Brushes, the most common issue that I had and a lot of other people have too is streaking or like drawing lines from the brush. And the best way that I can say to prevent that is to not like blend it like this or like this, but to do it like in circles, like stippling it into the skin, and it kind of blends the same as a beauty blender. So if you're like me and you prefer a sponge for your foundation or concealer, I recommend spraying it with some rose water or your setting spray to get it like damp and squishy, or you can run it under some water for a minute and then squeeze it out, make sure it's dry. And then the same thing, just go in like circles with like patting motions. I don't recommend going like this because you also get the same streaking and lines and stuff, and it doesn't really work. So one thing I've noticed with sponges is you kind of have to be kind of careful when you're blending, because if you blend the same spot for too long, you can start to actually lift the foundation up off your face. I do this, like, this is a common occurrence for me. If you overblend, you're kind of just picking up foundation off of your face, and it'll make like a little bare spot, and then you're back at square one. The key to blending foundation and concealer, I would say, just like everything else, practice makes perfect. Just figure out what works best for you, whether it's a brush, a sponge, your fingers, whatever you think looks best. I say do that, boo. You do that. Okay, so after your foundation, I typically do concealer next. You can do concealer before foundation. It's pretty much the same effect, depending if you want brightening or if you want coverage or if you want both. And what I mean by brightening is by highlighting the high points of your face, which typically, like myself and a lot of other influencers and beauty gurus and stuff, is you get a concealer that is a little bit lighter than your foundation shade. This is the e.l.f. Camo Concealer in the shade Light Peach. And usually people do it under here, 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 and like a triangle up here. I only do it underneath my eyes. I do like a backwards 7 shape, and I do some on my chin. I don't want to highlight my nose or my forehead because they're already big enough, honey. I don't need, like, being real, you can land an airplane on this 5 head. I don't need to turn it to a 6 head. Anyways, I recommend figuring out what areas of your face you want to highlight. Like if you have a smaller nose, you can put it on your nose to kind of bring it up a little bit and make it a little bit bigger. This is kind of part of contouring, but if you aren't into brightening, you can just use your same skin tone of concealer to cover under eye bags, pimples, blemishes, redness, whatever you want to do. Same thing with blending concealer. I use my sponge, or you can use a brush. I recommend like a smaller dome, like dense brush, and you just do the same thing, circular motions throughout the whole thing. At this point, you can do like cream contour or anything. I don't use cream contour, but if you do, now would be the time to do it before you set your face. I typically don't use cream contour, but if you're looking for a good one, the NYX Wonder Stick is really good. It's like a double-ended contour stick. It's got the brightening side that we talked about on one side, and then it's got the actual contour color on the other. Okay, so setting your face is using powder to really lock in all those cream products and liquid products in so they don't start sliding and melting off your face. And this kind of brings me to another question that I got, which is, what is baking? Baking is when you take like a translucent powder like this. I have the e.l.f. one. And you put it on a sponge like this. You kind of dump some out into the lid. This is how I actually set my face, but I don't do baking. I'll show you what I do in a minute. You kind of press it in, and then you get it on your sponge, and then you press it underneath. You put a lot on there, like a good generous amount, and then you let it sit for like 5 minutes or so. Usually, when I have tried baking, I would move on and do my eyebrows and like my eyeshadow first and then wipe it away. This is just to kind of prevent any creasing that can go on like under here from concealer and really lock that product in and to keep it from moving, and it smooths everything out under here. The only issue that I have with baking is it's such a popular trend with makeup right now, but I personally don't think it's a one-size-fits-all sort of trend. Don't get me wrong, like I've said before, if you do like baking on your skin and you like the way it looks, please keep doing it. It's all about what you like and what you think looks good on you. The only thing that I have to say about baking is sometimes girls don't like the way that their makeup turns out after they do baking because it's such a big trend, just like contouring and stuff. You see the celebrities, they take the huge amount of powder and dab it underneath their eyes and then wipe it away. And an issue that some people have, including myself, is if you have dry skin, the powder tends to cling to like your dry patches and accentuate it times 100, and it kind of makes it look like reptile skin. It's the best way to put it. Especially in my personal experience, because I have dry skin in the winter and I used to try baking and stuff before I realized that wasn't for me. That being said, it is the opposite for oily skin people. I really recommend baking. It really just holds everything together and keeps everything matte and smooth and good to go. It's really, again, all about trial and error. If you're not sure if it's gonna work on you, just try it out. Wear it for a day, see how you like it, see it in natural light, dim light, however you want to do it. And if you think it looks good, rock it, girl, honestly. And if anyone ever has shit to say about your makeup, dump your foundation on their head. I support it. Not now, though, because Corona. Unless you can throw it from 6 feet away, because we support social distancing in this house, which is also where we stay. This has been a PSA. All right, moving on. So as someone with dry skin, how I set my face is I do the same thing with the powder, but I only take a tiny, tiny bit, and then I like press it into the skin until it's fully dissolved. I don't like leave it there and then wipe it away later. I only put a little tiny bit and I push it into the skin, and I think it does the same effect as baking does on oily skin people, but it's a better technique for people with dry skin like me, in my opinion. All right, so after you set the creams and stuff, I move on to my contour because I didn't use a cream contour stick. I use powder, and I use the Too Faced Cocoa Contour palette. I got this at TJ Maxx for half off. And with this palette, I tend to go for the more warm toned contour color that's a little bit red toned instead of the cool tone one, because I have neutral undertone. Hi, here's me filming on my iPhone 8 because I'm poor. And I take like an angled brush, like this Morphe one. These bigger ones don't have numbers on them, but I can get them later if you want. More like an angled dome type one, and you tap in it a little bit, and then kind of, I like to press it into my skin, like in the hollows of your cheekbones, bring it up. I bring it up to my forehead and I kind of stamp it in. And if it's a little bit too harsh, you can always do what's called veiling, which is you take a tiny, tiny bit of your loose powder, you dip your big fluffy brush in it, and you kind of go over it so it blends out and it's not so orange. Something that I think is important about contouring is that it is such a big trend, such as baking in the makeup industry, but again, I don't see it as like a one-size-fits-all sort of trend. It really depends on the shape of your head and what you're looking to get out of your contour. I have like a round, like square-shaped head, so I do the normal. Like in the hollows of the cheekbones, I try to lift my cheeks up a little bit, and I put it in my temples and on my forehead to try to make it smaller. It doesn't really work. So what kind of goes hand in hand with contouring, and I think can be interchangeable, is bronzer. Some days, like today, I did only use bronzer, which I think if you find the right shade, it can be the same thing. I use the Butter Bronzer by Physicians Formula. This is the best thing in my collection, hands down. Face-wise. It smells amazing, first of all. It smells like, kind of like cocoa, but kind of like tanning lotion. It smells really good. I do the same thing with that. Stamp my brush in, the angled brush, and I put it on my cheeks, same areas. I usually do that down my neck, so it kind of brings a little bit of warmth to my face, and it blends so smooth, and it's a drugstore brand, so I highly recommend. So the next step for me after bronzer and contouring is blush. I use a Luxie Precision foundation brush. It's really not a foundation brush. It's more just like a fluffier, like dense dome brush again, and I usually put this on the apples of my cheeks and I bring it up and kind of blend it with my contour. Right now, I've been using the Tarte Amazonian blush in the shade Party. It's literally just the only one I've ever used up until recently. If you have the Shane X Jeffree Conspiracy Palette, the shade Pigment as blush, I'm just saying. It slaps, bitch. Okay, so last thing we're going to talk about is highlighter. Typically I do my highlighter at the very end of my makeup, like after brows, eyes, lips, everything. But I use the Jeffree Star Cosmetics Skin Frost in Sarcophagus. I can't open it because this is why, but it is so pretty. It's what I'm wearing right now. This has been on for like 2 hours and it's super blinding. It's buildable too. You usually use highlighter to, again, highlight the high points of the face, the cheekbones, the tip of the nose, the bridge of the nose, Cupid's bow, chin, brow bone, forehead, depending. I'm not highlighting my nose or my forehead for obvious reasons we've already discussed. If you are into like a more subtle highlighter, this isn't drugstore, it's Jeffree Star again, but the Supreme Frost in the shade Frozen Peach, is actually a really cute, subtle highlighter. I don't really care for the Supreme Frost. I feel like they're just kind of lackluster for me. I prefer the original Skin Frost, but this is really pretty for if you want like a natural sparkle to your makeup. Okay, so I hope I answered everyone's questions about base makeup. I know I have a lot of other questions about eyeshadow, brows, favorite drugstore products. I have several others that I want to answer, but I think I hit all the ones about base makeup. I'm going to do this in separate parts. Next will be eye makeup. I don't know when that's going to be up. I'm not a YouTuber yet. If any of you do have any other questions regarding anything makeup wise, feel free to DM me on either of my Instagram accounts. Make sure you follow my beauty Instagram account at hc.beauty with 2 Y's on the end. Same with my TikTok. That's embarrassing. Once again, I'm not a professional. I'm not claiming to be a professional. This is just me talking out of my ass into the camera pretty much. I hope I was able to help some of you, maybe clarify a few things. If you like this video, please like it. Please follow my beauty account. Make sure you watch the next one. Bye.